Do, do, do. At the end of this video. In the meantime, so I'm in Denver time, so we'll wait like just over 10 minutes to get started. But what you could do right now is grab out paper and a writing utensil and also chuck your phone across the room. And we'll get started shortly. And if you have any questions that you want me to answer in this live, you can put them in the chat now, and I can answer as many as possible as we progress through period 1, which is really just units 1 and 2. Hey everyone, we'll get started in about 6 or so minutes. If you have any questions, now's a great time to ask me, and I will answer them as we progress throughout this live. Jason, for your DBQ, if you use 4 docs and you hit 3 and do a contextualization and a thesis and outside evidence, is that all 7 points? So contextualization, thesis, using documents to support your argument, right? You're not just listing the documents, you're actually telling them what the document is saying, and you're using it to prove whatever claim you're making in your thesis statement. You only have to source 2 of them. So I would definitely try to go for at least 3, if not 4, to get that point, because a lot of times students misunderstand sourcing. So you're using 4 documents, plus sourcing, plus outside evidence. 6, and then like that 7-1 would be your complexity point. And you can get your complexity point in a lot of ways nowadays, which is what I really like about the College Board. So if you use all 7 documents, You can get and successfully use all 7 documents, you can get that complexity point. If you successfully source 4 documents, you can get that context or that complexity point. My big thing that I would suggest that you do based on what you just said is use more than 4 documents in your answer. I always tell my students to use at least 5, if not 6. And again, that's just because what if you misinterpret one, or what if you actually don't show understanding of one, or what if you don't actually use one to prove whatever claim you're making. DBQs, you should at minimum get a 5 out of 7 on, especially depending on how your teacher has taught it to you over the course of the year, because contextualization and thesis statement at this point should be like 100% there. And then if you're using the documents to support your claim, that's those 2 points right there. And if you're giving me outside evidence, that's that 5th point. And a 5 out of a 7 on a DBQ is a great score. We'll get started in about 4 minutes. What I would love for you to do if you don't have it out yet is grab out a sheet of paper. You're not texting on your phone. You're not typing on your computer. Grab out a notebook, grab out a sheet of paper, grab out a writing utensil, and we'll get started around 4 minutes from now. Ooh, why do you have trouble to use 5 plus 5 documents is great. Don't go for just 4 because that just really makes it riskier for you to get that second evidence point. But Jason, that also does bring up a great point. You definitely want to practice timing yourself writing if you haven't done that yet. If you're looking at the short answer questions, you have 40 minutes to respond to 3 short answer questions. Each one has an A, B, and C. So you have 13 minutes, just over 13 minutes to respond to each of those. And I would literally time yourself doing that just to see what the timing looks like for you, so that when you get into the test on test day, you understand how quickly you need to move or how much time you actually have that you can continue to write those short answer responses. Same thing with the DBQ. DBQ, your suggested time is an hour, 15 minutes to read and organize your thoughts with the documents, and then 45 minutes to actually type. And then your LEQ suggested time is 40 minutes. So 5 minutes to prep and plan and 35 minutes to type. Aaron, yes, it is true that using all 7 documents will get you that complexity point. But the key thing here is that, again, you need to use them to prove whatever claim you're making, and you do need to show understanding. So just because you list a document doesn't mean that you have used the document to get that complexity point. Can you use more than 1 document per paragraph? Yes! Y'all, what I always tell my students to do, oh man, you should come to my writing lab, which we're going to do next Thursday. What I always tell my students to do is the documents are going to naturally fall into themes, right? So you want to make sure that you are lumping those documents together in paragraphs based on whatever theme they would fall under. I'm thinking about the DBQ from last year was about women in the 1800s. Was it more economic or political? Like their rights, or were they fighting for more economic or political rights? Like in theory, you would then have a paragraph talking about political rights. You could have a paragraph talking about economic rights. Paragraphs can be really long. Please don't be stressed out about the fact that you might write a paragraph that's 10 plus sentences. Okay, we shall get started in literally 1 minute. Emmett, this live will be approximately 55 minutes from now. So game plan is for 1 hour. I will probably get through the content in 40 minutes, and then you might have some time for Q&A at the end. So if you just want to leave after I go over the content, you're welcome to do that. But the cool thing about this live, and I can see y'all's chat right now, and I can answer all your questions as we go, which is pretty fun. Let's see. Thanks, Jean, or Jean, however I pronounce your name. I will not be at the AP reading. I have too many jobs, and this summer I'm going on another job. I lead these fun historical travel trips. Okay, vexing pie, no you're not. That's what I'm here for. All right, let's get to it. Students, here we go. Our live is beginning right now. Here's what needs to happen. You need to immediately in this moment, chuck your phone across the room. I'm not talking put it on silent. I'm not talking put it face down next to you, chuck it across the room, because you need to actually give me your full attention and focus over the course of the next 55 minutes if you want this to be successful. You also need to have out a writing utensil and a sheet of paper, because I want you to take notes on this. And every single scientific study says that if you're handwriting notes, it's going to stick in your brain more than if you are typing notes. So we're going to practice full attention for 55 minutes, and we're going to practice writing. Let's get into it. Okay. Beautiful. If you have not yet followed me on social media, I'm just going to tell you to do that now. This is my shameless plug. Tuple for School on my TikTok. I have 60-second videos that cover every single topic for the entirety of the course. I'm also currently right now going over key things that you need to know, whether it's writing or content based. And I also have obviously a YouTube where I have longer format videos. And you should check out my ultimate review packet or my ultimate exam slayer if you want to learn the content and then put the content to the test in like a blue book style exam formula. All right, let's get to it. So I am doing these live reviews in terms of time periods. So if we're looking at the first time period in AP European history, it is 1450 to 1648, and that covers our first 2 units of class. Unit 1 is Renaissance and Exploration. Unit 2 is the Age of Reformation. So I'm going to still go unit by unit, but I want you to think about, especially at the very end, all of the things that happen within this first time period of study, because organizing your thoughts into kind of this larger flow of time is going to be helpful. I ask my students to make a timeline, again, because a lot of the stuff that we're teaching is happening at the same time, but we kind of maybe sometimes teach it like it's not. But everything that's happening is influencing everything else. So first time period of study that we're going to go over, 1450 to 1648. And let's get into it. So guiding question for Unit 1, which is again Renaissance and Exploration, is how did the revival of trade culturally, economically, politically, and socially impact Europe? This is the first thing that we're going to talk about. And if I were you, what I would do right now is make 4 columns or 4 rows in your notes. And I would write down like culture, econ, political, social, because I'm going to be talking about how Europe's connection to the rest of the world is changing every single one of those themes in Europe over this time period. I also can no longer see what you're putting in the comments, so I promise that I will take breaks every now and then and I'll come back and see what you're saying. Alrighty. So my kind of overarching thesis for really the first 5 units of study in this class is that these early modern Europeans, these Europeans from 1450 to honestly like early 1800s, are challenging traditionally held sources of power. They had to get educated in order to do that. This is all concomitant. It goes hand in hand with the increase in literacy. But these early modern Europeans are like, hey, the way that things have been going on in like the Middle Ages, we don't want that anymore. We actually like want to change this and maybe amass power for ourselves. So if we're looking at those traditionally held sources of power that dominated Europe in the Middle Ages, it's going to be the Catholic Church and monarchs. So these early modern Europeans in the Renaissance and in the Reformation are challenging the authority and power of the Catholic Church and the authority and the power of monarchs and kind of the nobility, the landed aristocracy that had been in power for a long time. Let's contextualize. Students, contextualization. This is the way that you should start out every single one of your AP history essays. You need to give me 3 to 4 sentences that situates your event in the larger global context of what's happening. So if I'm looking to contextualize the Renaissance and Exploration, I would need to talk about what's happening in the time period before that, aka the Middle Ages in Europe. So after the Roman Empire fell, Europe was kind of broken up into feudal kingdoms, and there was no political entity that unified all of Europe together. So the thing that stepped in to fill the void of that political vacuum is the Catholic Church. People were united not politically, but by their shared common faith. And over time, that gave the Pope a lot of increasing power, so much so that Pope Urban II calls for the First Crusade in 1095. Those crusades are ultimately unsuccessful for Europeans. Backtrack. The Crusades were attempts by European powers to essentially take back the Holy Land in the name of Christianity, because at that point it had been controlled by Muslims for a long time. Crusades ultimately unsuccessful. Europe did not regain control in the long term of the Holy Land, but indirectly quite successful because the Crusades hooked Europe back to trade routes in Africa and Asia and brought home, because the Crusaders looted, all of this new innovation and technology back to Europe. So it's the Crusades that helps bring Europe out of its dark ages. And then this is coupled with the Black Plague, another negative side effect of getting hooked back up to those Silk Road trades is that the plague spreads all the way from Asia back to Europe. This kills between 1/3 and 2/3 of the population of Europe. And it is because so many peasants die that they can start fighting for more rights, and fighting for more money. And it kind of leads to the collapse of feudalism. So Crusades hooks them back up to trade. They get all this innovation and technology. The Black Plague ends feudalism. So both of those things lead to Europe moving from its dark ages, its Middle Ages, into its Renaissance. I think it's also notable to point out that Petrarch, who is a name that you need to know, he was an early humanist thinker. Petrarch was actually the guy who coined the term the Dark Ages because he wanted to signify that what Europe was going through in its Renaissance was starkly different than what had characterized Europe for a long time. I also hope that all of your teachers have shown you the history teacher's Black Plague video, which is the ooh, fleas on rats, fleas on rats. I hope that you know what I'm talking about. Cool. I just talked about the Crusades, but you can see here, Europeans, right, are traveling throughout Europe, really in like Western Europe and kind of like the Holy Roman Empire area, to go down to the Holy Land to try to take back that land. They're unsuccessful, but as we can see here, like they're going to get connected to all of the trade routes that end right there, which is most of them in Afro-Eurasia. So Europe has entered its Renaissance, its rebirth, and it is its rebirth in a lot of different ways, not only art, but I will start out with the Italian Renaissance as it pertains to art. Art in the Middle Ages, as you can see by the picture on the left, was dictated by religious figures in heaven. We see lots of gold. They operated in what is called the hieratic scale. So the bigger something was in a picture, the more important it was. It looks very 2D and also very obviously religious, right? We got gold, we got halos, we got angels. That is in great contrast to something that we see just over 100 years later, which is the School of Athens. I love this image. I'm sure your teacher loves this. Your teacher loves this painting too. I would not be surprised if this painting showed up on the AP test because it is so indicative of what the Renaissance meant. We have here people from Greece and Rome highlighted by Raphael to look at, again, like, hey, look at where we came from. Greece and Rome was so good. We now have all these texts from antiquity that we got back from madrasas because they were being preserved in the Holy Land, and now we have access to them again. Oh my gosh, Rome, so cool. Greece, so cool. Let's like be smart, just like they were again. So we have the scene depicting all of these like really brilliant Greeks and Romans, again, at a school together. We also see that there's a clear there's a clear focal point. We can see just the fact that art itself is more geometric, and they've like started to use math to figure out how to make scenes not look 2D like what we see here, but much more 3D like what we see here. Okay, let's start with some cultural changes due to the Renaissance. So if you think about the Middle Ages being the age of faith, the age that's dominated by the church, as Europe gets connected to the rest of the world, as Europe regains these Greek and Roman texts, as Europe starts to make more money, literacy starts to grow, we see a focus not only on religion anymore, but a focus on the individual. So individualism, we're now going to focus on our achievements and what we are capable of doing in this life, rather than just what our next life is going to look like. And this goes hand in hand with secular humanism. Secular is a word that you need to know. It just means worldly. So you can think about it as the opposite of religious. So again, rather than just focusing on religion and theology, we are now focusing on ourselves and what we as humans are capable of doing that doesn't even necessarily relate to religion. A lot of the ideas that were shared and disseminated throughout Europe that are rooted in this Renaissance humanist thought was because of Gutenberg's printing press. So the 1440s, again, thanks to Silk Road trade and movable type came all the way from Korea. Gutenberg takes that together and creates his printing press. So now rather than having to handwrite every single thing, you can mass produce it more quickly. And this is going to lead to the spread of Renaissance thought outside of specifically Italy, which is where this Renaissance started. This also leads to the rise of vernacular language. Vernacular is your local language rather than just Latin. People are now able to read and write and speak in the language that they have probably spoken for the last couple hundred years. Okay, going back to art a little bit. It is like my dream. I told my students this in class today and they were horrified. It is my dream that a DBQ would be just entirely art. Like, just all images, just all about artistic movements and talking about how that could be like a change in European social structures or cultural characteristics. I would love that so much. Anyway, the Italian Renaissance versus the Northern Renaissance. So, whether we're looking at art or culture, the Italian Renaissance is really going to focus on like those Greek and Roman myths. And also they're still going to paint a lot of religious scenes because that is like they're still kind of right coming out of those Middle Ages. And the Italian Renaissance focuses on the classical ideal. And what I mean by that is that you have a bunch of like really rippling, built, naked people. This is what humanity should look like. And the key writer that you need to know with the Italian Renaissance is Machiavelli. Machiavelli wrote a book called The Prince, in which he says, the ends justify the means. And this is what it means to amass new political power that is completely secular and not related to kind of a pope's authority at all, which was a big deal in Italy. The Northern Renaissance, artistically, this is a painting called The Garden of Earthly Delights by Hieronymus Bosch. This is a really great depiction of what the Northern Renaissance looks like. It's a lot of people all over the place, and it's really detailed. That is the Northern Renaissance. If you ever see a picture like that on your AP test, lots of people, real detailed, Northern Renaissance. Desiderius Erasmus is the writer that I want you to know about the Northern Renaissance, and I often contrast him with Machiavelli in my classes. Desiderius Erasmus wrote a pamphlet called On the Education of a Christian Prince, and he is saying, hey, actually, like, these new kings, these new princes should consider the well-being of the people within their land and not just act pragmatically to achieve whatever goal that they want. So huge difference between the Italian Renaissance and the Northern Renaissance is that the Northern Renaissance, as it shifts to the Low Countries, so that's gonna be like Netherlands, kind of Northwestern Europe area, really retains a Christian focus, whereas the Italian Renaissance doesn't. Okay, economic changes. Let us talk about the Columbian Exchange. In 1492, say it with me, students, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and he was motivated, and then subsequent European explorers were motivated by three things: gold, glory, and God. This is also true for new imperialism, but we'll get there in next week. Gold in the form of literal gold and silver bullion. So they were trying to extract a lot of literal metals from the Americas, but also in the form of natural resources eventually. So like we can see on this map that I have right here, you have potatoes coming back to Europe, and that's going to drastically increase the population in Europe because it's more nutrient dense. Glory in the form of pride for the country or the monarch who sent you. So we're also thinking about these conquistadors in modern day Latin America, so Mesoamerica and South America. They're also like wanting to conquer because that makes them look good and we remember them in history. And lastly, when we're looking at God in exploration, it's specifically Catholic missionaries. We're looking at the Jesuits, who are the ones who are spearheading a lot of that missionary work in Latin America. They are also the ones who are setting up a lot of schools. So this Columbian Exchange, which I have on this map right here, refers to the exchange of goods, ideas, people, diseases from Africa, Europe, and Asia to the Americas and vice versa. This is like the first time that the globe is really connected, and this change of goods drastically changes most things in the world. If we're looking just at how Europe used the Columbian Exchange and its colonies in the Americas, Europe was like, cool, this land is mine now. And thanks to guns, germs, and steel, I can conquer all this really easily because indigenous peoples don't have immunity to diseases. Neither have they developed advanced weaponry like guns. So the Europeans were able to really easily conquer the Americas. And then they set up plantations using specifically, once indigenous labor failed, African slave trade. So the Middle Passage refers to the passage specifically between Africa and the Americas. And this is going to be predominantly African kingdoms were forced to be involved in the slave trade by a Portuguese king. And they then forced about 12 million Africans to go along the Middle Passage, mainly to South America, where just most sad fact of this is that the average life expectancy for an African enslaved person living on a Brazilian sugar plantation in the 1700s was 23 years old, because it was cheaper to buy new people than to just take care of the ones that was there. It's real sad. This leads to this exploration, this age of exploration leads to the development of mercantilism. So this is absolutely something that you need to know in this course. And honestly, my FRQ predictions, whether it's DBQ or LEQ, I would love to see European economic development as one of those answers. I know that y'all hate that. I would love that essay so much, but it will not come from this time period. It won't come from as early as 1450. So Europe sets up colonies in the Americas, like we can see here. A lot of these colonies and the settling of the Americas is also due to joint stock companies. So joint stock companies is an idea that you can get all of your best friends to go in on a voyage together so that if it's successful, you all reap the benefits. But if it fails, you are not losing all of your money. You're all kind of losing a portion of what you would own. So it's just a more helpful way to go into business with other people because you are sharing the risks or you are sharing the rewards. Dutch East India Company also becomes extraordinarily wealthy during this time period. The Dutch are not concerned with the Americas. The Dutch get really involved in Southeastern Asia. They control the Spice Islands, so like nutmegs, cloves, eventually coffee all come from there. The Dutch are going to bring them all back to Europe, and it's going to make them absurdly wealthy. Oh yeah, here's my cute little map. Empire that I really want you to know that has its height here in this time period, so 1500s, is Portugal. So Prince Henry the Navigator had a navigational school. Portugal gets really involved in South America or in, Brazil, and then moves its way over to the Indian Ocean trade into Africa. And that's because of the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494 on the Iberian Peninsula. Spain and Portugal are like, hey, let's like prevent fighting. So can someone tell us what lands that we can conquer in the Americas? They go to the Pope. The Pope's like, we're just going to do it right here. So Portugal gets Brazil, and then Portugal has to explore everywhere east of that, whereas Spain gets everything west of that. So that forces Portugal to get really involved in the Indian Ocean trade, and they profit immensely off of their Indian Ocean trade. And, Spain also profits immensely off of its colonies in the Americas. Something I did not share earlier that I want to share now is that if we're looking at the Crusades and when trade first started coming back to Europe, really in the 1200s, that is all going to come through the Mediterranean region, right? It's the Italian merchants that are controlling that trade back into Europe. But here, once the hemispheres are connected, power shifts from the Mediterranean region to the Atlantic region, which makes sense if you think about it, because these are the countries right here that have the ability to, closely access other parts of the world compared to what's going on in the Mediterranean. Just geographically speaking, it would take them longer. Okay, political changes. New monarchs. So these new monarchs, again, rise to power, the challenge of the Catholic Church, and rise to power, the challenge of like just old monarchies as well. They are consolidating their power through the wealth that they are receiving from the Americas, through religion and controlling the religion within their specific lands, and through militaries, because now that we have a lot of money, we're going to start funding some standing militaries. So we have new monarchs rising in power, gaining and consolidating their power in really specific ways. But we also have merchant elites start to rise and emerge as this like new middle class. Great merchant family that you can think of is the Medici family in Italy. So if you are controlling wealth coming in, you are setting up banking systems, you are going to emerge as wealthier than the peasants. So therefore, you're going to be in that middle class. If we think about France during this time, and even shortly after this time, there's conflict between the nobles of the robe and the nobles of the sword. So the nobles of the robe are going to be that landed aristocracy whose titles have been passed down for centuries. Whereas you have the nobles of the sword, these new nobles who are like, actually, I think that I can get power in my own way, whether that's fighting for someone, again, being in the military, or whether that is controlling the economy in some way or becoming some kind of merchant. So you have also this conflicting power between not only monarchs and people who are gaining power in new ways, but also through like the nobility, because the nobility starts to change as a result of all of this wealth and as a result of Europe's rebirth. Two people listed by name that you need to know, Henry VIII, Elizabeth I. I would definitely use those as examples of how these new monarchs consolidated power through religion. Henry VIII, right, was like, hey, Catholic Church, I want to get a divorce. Catholic Church was like, you can't do that. Henry VIII was like, cool, I'm going to do it anyway, and then form my own church that then I will place myself as the head of. Elizabeth I, continues this trend of Protestantism in England. So that is just a really specific way that you can talk about how these new monarchs are using religion to consolidate their power. And another example of an early attempt at religious pluralism is Charles V, who is leader of the Holy Roman Empire. He is right here. He passes the Peace of Augsburg in 1555. This is saying that within specifically certain lands within the Holy Roman Empire, local princes can determine what religion that they follow within like their little tiny land, even though overarchingly the Holy Roman Empire is going to be Catholic. So this is the first attempt at religious pluralism. We see this play out much more clearly after the 30 Years' War with the Peace of Westphalia, but you should know the Peace of Augsburg. Okay, social changes. So we have this agricultural revolution that occurs, again, thanks to new crops coming in from the Americas. This is going to lead to more food being produced. This is also concomitant with agricultural changes. So Western Europe tends to adopt this 3-field system, which means that rather than just planting all of your crops all at once, you're going to plant them in 3 fields. You're going to leave one fallow every year. That's going to help the soil retain nutrients. And you're just going to plant on 2 of them, and then you'll rotate that fallow field every year, which means that you, over time, will actually be able to produce more food, which is going to be able to lead to a higher population. Commercial revolution starts now. This is commercial means commerce, so economy related. People start buying things and trading things and selling things. So the very, very nascency, the beginnings of capitalism start now, right? As Europe is getting more connected to trade, people are buying more things. So Europe, Western Europe, begins its very, very slow march toward capitalism in the 1500s. The enclosure movement kind of happens throughout this time period. I think we most commonly talk about it when we talk about the Industrial Revolution. But prior to, I guess, in the Middle Ages in Europe, if you think about feudal farms, you have a shared common pasture that everyone in your village would grow their crops on, would feed their animals on. And the enclosure movement, once people started getting really wealthy, people just literally started enclosing or building fences around parts of that common pasture to keep certain people out, to keep the lower peasants out, so that they can then rent out that land and become landlords and profit off of renting out that land. The enclosure movement then leads to a lot of people moving to cities. So this is early urbanization as well. People are moving to cities because they know that that's where they can find jobs, and also because sometimes they're forced off of their land. A little ice age happens. I like to talk about that because this is a Peter Bruegel the Elder painting that highlights the fact that there was a little ice age that led to a really short decline in population. But over time, population by the mid 1500s, early 1600s returned Europe back to its pre-plague levels. So population was rising pretty rapidly as a result of the connection to the Americas. All of this is true for Western Europe. In the East, serfdom is still existing. This is where we start to see a huge disparity between what's going on in Eastern Europe and what's going on in Western Europe, especially economically speaking. Okay, so here I'm going to give you 3 kind of wrap-up statements, and then I will check the chat to see if you have any questions for me. So, culturally, as a result of exploration, Europe underwent immense change because they reacquired Greek and Roman texts, which spurred on humanist and secular thought. Rather than solely focusing on theology and religion, humanists began to explore new, diverse academic interests. We see this play out in the scientific revolution in the later unit. Economically, hemispheres are finally connected, leading to a massive increase in resources and a massive increase in wealth to those who controlled trade. New economic elites emerged, and Europe marched toward a capitalist economic system, at least in the West. Politically, new monarchs are gaining and consolidating their power with help from the wealth of their new world colonies. Competition to control trade leads to a lot of conflicts that we will mainly see play out in a later unit in this. But just know that, right, they want to amass as much money as possible. They want to make sure that they are limiting the power and the wealth that neighboring countries have. So this starts to lead to an increase in rivalries among European powers. And socially, population of Europe reaches its pre-plague levels. Most Europeans still relied on agriculture and oriented their lives around kind of their village or where they lived. The commercial revolution and the enclosure movements in Western Europe led to urbanization. People are moving to cities. This is really going to prime them eventually for the Industrial Revolution. And in Eastern Europe, serfdom is codified into law. Oh man, perfect timing. So proud of myself. All right, that is Unit 1. I am going to look at all of your comments. If you need to go up and do something, now's a great time. We can do like a 2 to 3 minute break as I answer some questions before we get started with Unit 2, information. Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes, this will be saved. Wow. Hi, everyone. Oh, Treaty of Tordesillas. I feel like it's the 1494. Spain gets everything west of the line of longitude. Portugal gets everything to the east of the line. So it just was a way to prevent conflict in Europe by getting the Pope involved, and then both Spain and Portugal agreed to it. Portugal was like, cool, I got Brazil. I'll go ahead to the Indian Ocean. Spain was like, great, you get Brazil. I'm going to conquer the rest of Latin America. For the agricultural revolution, yeah, there are. But I think if you know crop rotation is mentioned by name in the course exam description, and the enclosure movement is as well. So if you know those two, that's fine. Wealth of merchant elites have to do with new monarchs. So it just means that like political things are changing, right? So monarchs are gaining and consolidating their power, but now we have like this new group of people who is also amassing a lot of power. And they're amassing power because they control wealth. Explain artistic movements. Oh man, yes. All that you need to know about artistic movements right now is actually, I'm going to do that at the end of the next unit because I'm going to talk about Baroque and Mannerism then. So just remind me again at the end. Elizabeth I was a new monarch. That's a great question because she's like continuing a lot of what Henry VIII did. I also think is a really good example of actually that she's not a very good example because she did kill some people because they were Catholic. Let me just talk about England for a second. We like to think about in this course, England is this very enlightened nation, right? They have embraced Protestantism. They control a lot of trade. We have, the English Civil War happens a century and a half before the French Revolution, and England has like figured a lot of stuff out. And England is quite progressive in a lot of ways, right? Voltaire was exiled to England, and when he was exiled in England, he was like, "Wow, they have economic equality because nobles have to pay taxes. People there's like a rule of law that they all follow." And I just think England is progressive in a lot of ways, except for they hate Catholics. So England is not religiously tolerant compared to a lot of the other places that are going to experience religious tolerance as a result of the Protestant Reformation. This is 1450 to 1648. Mercantilism, in order to have mercantilism, you need to have colonies. So mercantilism happens with colonies, right? That's like the mother country controlling lands, literally extracting resources from that land, shipping it back to the mother country. It's made into usable goods, and then they're selling it back to the colonies for profit. So it's benefiting entirely the mother country at the expense of the colonies. So this is like that extraction of resources to produce goods, sell them back. And that is going to contribute to like the slow march of capitalism because you're controlling the means of production, but you're also controlling like the land, labor, and capital involved in that. I need to move on. I'm going to answer these questions at the end, just because I want to make sure that I cover all this content now. But keep asking me questions, and I hope that this is helpful. Okay, you don't need to memorize dates in this course, but there are things that are called marker dates that I think are very helpful for you to know. So for example, I got a little ahead of myself. I'll get there. Guiding questions for this unit are: what are core Protestant beliefs and how do they compare and contrast to Catholic beliefs? So if we're looking at that historical thinking skill comparison, what is going on between Protestants and Catholics? What similarities do they share? What differences do they have? And then how did the Protestant Reformation politically and culturally impact Europe? So again, this is looking at that historical thinking skill causation. What are the effects of the Protestant Reformation, specifically looking at politically and culturally? And the AP test loves the Protestant Reformation. There were like a couple years in a row when they asked multiple questions about the Protestant Reformation. It's been a minute since that has happened. So I would not be surprised if there were an SAQ or an LEQ prompt about the Protestant Reformation. Just throwing that out there. Okay, contextualizing Protestant Reformation, that is essentially us, again, recapping what I just talked about in Unit 1. Europe is in its cultural, economic, and political and social rebirth. They have re-entered the global stage, and they are living it up. They're gaining so much wealth, they're gaining so much power because of their control of trade, specifically in the Americas. Also, there's a rise in literacy thanks to Gutenberg's printing press. There's this focus on individualism, secular humanism, and diverse academic interests. And all of those things are going to coalesce into the Protestant Reformation. So back to the marker dates. Marker dates are just helpful for you to understand, like just to have these like little anchors in your brain of like, this happened at this point, and you can then just think about all of the like long-term or larger effects that happened afterwards. The one marker date that I need you to know, the two marker dates that I need you to know for this whole time period is 1517. That's when Martin Luther writes his 95 Theses. That is a helpful thing to know, that right, Europe was united in a universal Catholic Christendom before then. 1517 starts the splintering of all of that, starts the beginning of the religious wars. And then the last marker date that you need to know for this unit is 1648, but we're going to get there. So Martin Luther writes his 95 Theses, his 95 complaints against the Catholic Church. He's able to do this because he became a monk and then read the Bible and was like, hey, Catholic Church, like what I'm reading in the Bible does not seem like what you are doing and what you are telling other people exists, which the Catholic Church, again, could do because of a lack of literacy in Europe. People just trusted what their local priests or bishops had to say because they were the ones who had access to a Bible and also could read the Bible. Now that more people have access to Bibles and now that more people can read, Martin Luther's like, cool, yeah, indulgences probably shouldn't be a thing. We shouldn't like pay to like receive forgiveness of sins. And that was his biggest critique. So Martin Luther originally wanted to just reform the Catholic Church from within. And then that did not happen. He formed a whole new Christian denomination, right? So under the banner of Christianity, you have at this point in history, the Greek Orthodox Church, the Roman Catholic Church, and then the new Protestant Church. Other key person that you need to know is John Calvin. John Calvin uniquely focused a lot on predestination. So predestination is the idea that God chose before the foundations of the earth those who would achieve salvation, those who would not. And he focused also a lot on the Protestant work ethic, which is the idea that God rewards monetarily those who work hard. And boy, do we see that Protestant work ethic play out in the Dutch Republic. So other common beliefs of Protestants would be sola fide. So that just means faith alone. You are justified. You're made right before God by faith in Christ alone, not by works, not by paying money, but only by faith. They also believed in the primacy of Scripture. Martin Luther himself advocated against the position of the Pope. He said it was unnecessary. Martin Luther also argued for a priesthood of all believers. So everyone is equal before God because that's what he learned in the Bible. And that's going to conflict with a lot of those like church hierarchies that had existed beforehand. Also, Martin Luther was like, you should all read the Bible on your own, which again is going to encourage the spread of literacy across Europe, but it's also going to encourage the spread of new Protestant denominations because now that people have access to Bibles and are reading what they're reading in the Bibles on their own, they're interpreting Scripture differently, which is going to lead to a lot of new Protestant denominations. Ooh, the one key group that you need to know here that is disliked by Protestants and Catholics is the Anabaptists. So Protestant Church, Catholic Church, you get baptized as an infant, especially if you think about like the fact that child mortality rates were so high all throughout like the Middle Ages and even during this time. You would always get baptized as an infant to secure, in theory, your salvation. Anabaptists, after their reading of the Scripture, said, I think that like baptism only counts for believers who like profess as an adult, like they've made the conscious choice to like be in the faith. And this was not well received and led to a lot of persecution of the Anabaptists by both Catholics and Protestants. So those, if you just know essentially Calvinists, who in France are called Huguenots, And if you know Anabaptists, that's great. Some cultural effects of the Reformation. Well, Catholic Church was like, what's going on here? Who are all these people that are leaving the faith, the one true faith? So they actually convene and meet to reform and also try to stop the spread of Protestantism. So they convene at what is called the Council of Trent, where they do a couple of things. They reaffirm Catholic doctrine. They publish their index of prohibited books. So this is books that you are not allowed to read because they go against traditional Catholic teaching. They also commission new missionary orders. So this leads to the rise of the Jesuits and the Ursuline nuns. And they commission a ton of art and architecture. So if we're looking at Baroque art and architecture, which is what we see here, the one word that you need to associate with Baroque is drama. It is as dramatic as possible because the idea behind Baroque art is that you are so emotionally captivated and taken by what you see. Well, that's it. That you are emotionally captivated and taken by what you see. So if we're specifically like looking at a Christian church, you're like, oh yes, you see these gigantic Catholic churches, these gigantic cathedrals with all this art inside. Like you really think that like this is heaven on earth right here, which is so different than Protestant churches. Protestant churches were extremely austere. So they were quite bare, intentionally so, because a lot of these Protestants were like, actually, what we see here could distract from like the true worship of God. So let's just keep things very bare and basic. Political effects of the Reformation. Well, people did not agree on the fact that other people were practicing different versions of Christianity, which leads to almost a century and a half of religious wars. The ones that you need to know about, and also my favorite ones to talk about, are going to be the 30 Years' War in the Holy Roman Empire and the Wars of Religion in France. Let's break this down. In general, you have the Catholic Habsburgs versus the Protestant non-Habsburgs. People start fighting against the Habsburgs because they want more political power or they want to diminish the power of the Catholic Church. So essentially you have like Charles V and all of his heirs and all of those Habsburg leaders holding on to Catholicism because it also supports their rule. And you have people who want to take power away, political or religious power away from the church or from the Habsburgs who are fighting against them. Let's talk about French Wars of Religion because I love Catherine de Medici. In France, you essentially have Catherine de Medici's husband, Henry, dies. You have three families competing for power. One is ultra-Catholic, one is Catholic but not ultra-Catholic, and one's Protestant. Eventually, Catherine's daughter, Margaret, unites with the Henry of Navarre, or Henry Bourbon. They become married, kind of ending that French War of Religion. Henry is crowned King Henry IV in France. So he was Protestant, but now he says Paris is worth a mass, which I think is also something that would be helpful to know. In this period of religious chaos and this period of religious wars, Henry IV of France says, maybe like we should just like practice some religious pluralism in our country, which means France is still going to be Catholic, but now you can practice Protestantism just in specific areas outside of Paris. So this is, again, an attempt at that religious pluralism, allowing people to practice whatever faith they want within one country. And we see that more clearly play out in the 30 Years' War in the Holy Roman Empire. Starts out as, I would argue, genuine religious devotion. Over time becomes increasingly political as outside forces get involved. France gets involved, Sweden gets involved, again, to try to weaken the power of the Habsburgs, and ultimately ends with the Peace of Westphalia. But before we talk about that, I want to talk about Sweden. So Gustavus Adolphus is the leader of Sweden at this time, and his military revolution that he has undergone with Sweden and his fighting in the 30 Years' War forces Sweden to emerge as like this dominant European power, which they remain, which we never talk about in this course, until Peter I of Russia destroys them in the Great Northern War. So Sweden becomes actually a really dominant power in Northern Europe as a result of the 30 Years' War, and then that ends a little bit later. So 30 Years' War ends in 1648. That's our final marker date for this course. 1648 is the Peace of Westphalia, which I think I have on my next slide. Yeah! Peace of Westphalia is huge for a lot of reasons, but maybe number one, the most, is that it essentially ends religious wars in Europe. People are no longer going to fight about what religion they follow because this says that people within their countries can decide for themselves what religion they want to follow, whether it's Protestantism or Catholicism. So this idea of national self-determination, you can determine for yourself as a nation what faith you want to follow, is huge and radical at the time. It also leads to a change in political boundaries. It also leads to the deaths of millions of people, leads to the rise of France as a major European power, declining power of the Holy Roman Empire, which just kind of exists but doesn't exist for a really long time. So it starts to crumble. We see the rise of Germanic states kind of replace that. We also see the decline in the power of the Habsburgs. So they used to control a lot of Central Europe. And as a result of the 30 Years' War, they're going to shift east. So we start to see the Habsburgs more concentrated in Austria. And this also ends the idea of universal Christendom. Europe is no longer going to be united by a shared common faith like they had been for millennia, right? They are now going to allow for more religious pluralism. People can practice whatever faith that they want. Okay, social effects of the Reformation. Oh, give me another FRQ about women. So fun to talk about. This leads to the debate about women, right? If Martin Luther is saying that there's a priesthood of all believers, everyone is equal before the Lord, does that mean that women can now be preachers? Does that mean that women have the right to get an education? This is a hotly debated topic throughout pretty much this entire course, and it really starts here. So women start to seek out more education, but that is often met with witchcraft accusations. Specifically, Protestant women are going to be accused of witchcraft because they're maybe choosing not to marry, or they're living by themselves, or they're educated. And people are like, whoa, 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 the devil's in our midst. It's these educated women. And that leads to witchcraft accusations peaking in like the late 1500s and early 1600s. And women like actually died because like people thought that they were witches, and they thought they were doing the devil's work in Europe, and that it was the devil using women that led to all this religious conflict. So like women become the scapegoat because they just wanted to get educated. Also, this led to local governments regulating morality. Hear me out. In the Middle Ages, everyone had a shared common faith. The Pope and the priests and the bishops and the archbishops said, everyone, this is what we believe, this is how we act. So it was really easy to know exactly how people were going to act, and they would be shamed or accused of being sinners if they didn't, right? Like you all had to fit into the social norm. But now that people are practicing different faiths or even stepping away from religion in general, local governments have to step in to regulate morality. And they're not very successful at this at first, because they just kind of kept up the idea of public humiliation and shame through things like chivalry or like stocks, putting your heads in stocks so that like your peers would shame you for whatever action that you did that was wrong. So local governments start to step in and say, hey, this is how we should act here. This is how we shouldn't act here. And this is what's going to happen if you like act poorly. Okay, I'll wrap it all up. I'll tell you vocab terms you need to know. I'll answer all your questions in the last 12 minutes. As a result of the Reformation, culturally, Europe underwent immense changes. Literacy increased, education increased, vernacular started becoming more widely used, and national identities started forming. When people are writing in and speaking their common language, public opinion about what it means to be, for example, German or French starts to form. So rather than identifying yourself specifically as your religion, you start to identify yourself with the other people around you in the same borders who speak the same language. So national identities start to rise as a result of the Protestant Reformation. Politically, wars were fought. Wars were waged over the right to practice Catholicism or Protestantism. And while some of these wars were fought out of genuine religious devotion, they were often exploited in order to gain political power or economic power. 30 Years' War is a great example of that. 30 Years' War will probably show up on your AP test. Maybe not like short answer question, but definitely multiple choice. They love the 30 Years' War, again, because it ends with that Peace of Westphalia, that marker date. Socially, local governments begin to regulate morality. The debate about women starts and continues. And witchcraft accusations increase due to the turmoil that plagued Europe in the 1500s and 1600s. I didn't say anything about like innovation in science yet, but we're going to get there, right? The Protestant Reformation, the shift away from religion, really starts to force people almost to think about their place in the world and think about why the world is the way it is. That's really going to take off when we get to Unit 4, looking at the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. Cool. What I need you to do right now is grab out your phone. Hopefully you chucked it across the room. So go grab it back out and take a picture of this right here. These are named by name in the course exam description, which means these are things that you 110% absolutely need to know walking into the AP test 2 weeks from today. I covered all of them. Didn't talk about the Ottoman Empire, if you knew that first. And I can talk about mannerism. Ottoman Empire starts, so Ottoman Empire is in like Southeastern Europe is the way that you can think about it. They're kind of in the Balkans. They've been waning in power for a while. Ottoman Empire tries to, they're Muslim, predominantly Muslim, led by Islamic leaders. They try to extend their influence into Eastern Europe a couple times. They are stopped in the 1600s, the Battle of Vienna. It's actually 1683. So shortly after this, but just know that the Ottoman Empire is existing. The Ottoman Empire is waning in power in the East. They're going to get in conflict now with the Habsburgs because the Habsburgs are in Austria, which is much closer to the Ottoman Empire in Southeastern Europe. Mannerism is another style of art that happens in this time period. So if we're looking at the kind of four major styles of art from this first time period, we have the Italian Renaissance, we have the Northern Renaissance, we have Baroque, and we have Mannerism. Mannerism is like the emo goth response to the Italian Renaissance. Mannerists paint things that are really distorted. Mannerists use a lot of dark imagery and like just dark colors. So if you see something that is probably still Christian, but is like really like distorted hands or like really elongated bodies or elongated hands in really dark colors, that's gonna be Mannerist art. So Baroque is like, we love everything, everyone's bright and colorful, drama. Mannerism's like, but drama, it's the emo response. Okay, hopefully you took a picture of this. I got 8 minutes, which means I'm going before 7 o'clock. Here we go. Ooh, mercantilism and capitalism. Well, capitalism wasn't entirely a theory yet. Capitalism is essentially owning all means of production. We see capitalism really happen after industrialization. Mercantilism is like land produces wealth, right? We need land, we need colonies because colonies give us resources. We can use those resources to make things. Oh, I like Xander. Mercantilism equals get money and don't spend money. What's the difference between Puritans and Anglicans? Oh man, we're gonna talk about this more in our next unit. Puritans are like really extreme Protestants. Puritans are the type of people who would like look at one verse from the Bible and spend weeks meditating on it, like real extreme. Oliver Cromwell, great example of a Puritan. He, right after the English Civil War, banned Christmas because he thought that participating in activities like that would lead to too much sin. Anglicans, in general, retain a lot of like Catholic beliefs, but the one key difference at first is that they allow divorce. Catholic Church does not allow divorce. Oh yeah, I can. Can I move my camera? It's just Mannerism and Baroque. I don't think I can move my camera. I'm sorry. Edict of Nantes. Yeah, so Edict of Nantes ends the French Wars of Religion. It is saying that in France, you can be Catholic and you can be Protestant. It doesn't matter which one you follow. You can't practice Protestantism in certain areas. But after those religious wars, Henry, who was Protestant, converts to Catholicism because he's like, I just need to keep the peace. The majority of people in France are Catholic. So I'm going to be Catholic now, but Protestants, you can still do your thing. This is then revoked by Louis XIV's Edict of Fontainebleau, which says, nope, Protestantism is no longer allowed in France. You have to be Catholic if you're going to be French. Isn't Mannerism like Walmart Renaissance art? What does that even mean? I don't know how to answer that question, but I love that analogy in theory. How did the Black Plague allow the peasants to fight back? Great question. Black Plague led to the deaths of between 1/3 and 2/3 of Europe's population. So peasants, because there are so few of them left, were highly needed by like lords to work their land. And peasants were like, I'm not going to do this under the same conditions that I've been doing it. Like you can give me more money or I'm going to leave and I'm going to go work for someone else who's going to give me more money. Yeah, where can I post the slides that I used? I'll post them in like the comment section so you can have access to them then. Yeah, predictions for the test this year. I genuinely think that I hope that there's going to be a question on economic development. I would love to see a more clear question on nationalism because last year, that was my prediction for last year was women and nationalism. And one of the DBQs was on women and one of the DBQs was on fascism. So I would like a more clear DBQ or FRQ on nationalism. Habsburgs got less powerful after the 30 Years' War because most of the fighting happened in the Holy Roman Empire, and they arguably lost. Then they lost a lot of land. Mercantilism and imperialism. Mercantilism. Hmm. You could argue they're very similar in concept, right? I think mercantilism really just deals with economic control and economic power. Imperialism also deals with like political and cultural, like political and cultural dominance. But you could argue that they're really similar because they're using those colonies, their new lands, for the same reason. They want to extract as much money as possible and then also use that land for new markets. Oh, best way to practice FRQs, y'all. You don't need to write a whole essay to practice your FRQ. You can write a contextualization statement. You can write a thesis statement. You can do a pre-write of how you'd respond to that essay. I think that spending 40 minutes working on an FRQ every night leading up to the test is not productive and not helpful. If you struggle with body paragraphs the most, if you struggle with listing evidence and then using that evidence to support whatever claim you're making, just find a question online and then respond to it in just a body paragraph. You don't need to write out the entire essay every single time. You can just really choose to focus on the parts that you struggle with. Talking with your teacher about this could also be really helpful. Hopefully you've written a lot of essays in class, and hopefully you have some kind of idea of what you need to work on the most, whether that's contextualization, thesis, structuring your essay in one of those historical thinking skills or whatever. So I think that once you have that information, or if you already know that information, then just practicing that is really helpful. Calvinists versus Lutherans, they just kind of happened in different parts of Europe. So Calvinists really start out in France, and then Louis XIV passes that Edict of Fontainebleau and kicks all the Protestants out. So then all the Protestants actually go over to Eastern Europe, like in Prussia area. Or sorry, the Huguenots go over to like Frederick II. And Lutherans really just kind of stay in like that southern central Germany area. I think the wars of religion started out with genuine religious devotion. I think they got more political. So that's like a fun little CCOT, right? They started out one way, they ended the other way. Economic development in this course, isn't it like mercantilism, capitalism, Keynesian economics, or communist governments? Yeah, with some people in the middle where you put those arrows, but we'll cover that. What's the best way to grade your own FRQs? ChatGPT. Genuinely. What you need to do, I have my students do this too. What you need to do is like put in a response to your FRQ and then ask chat to grade it using like the 2025 AP History rubric. And it's not always accurate, but it can at least give you really good feedback on what you did well and what you haven't done well, especially if your teacher hasn't helped you with that yet. Brody, I will not go over new versus old imperialism because we're going to get there next week. What are your other questions? I got 2 minutes left, y'all. This is kind of like a crash course in all the content that you need to know. This isn't necessarily skills focused. I tried to organize it a little bit in looking at specific skills, but hopefully this was helpful in your remembering of the content that you probably haven't thought about since the fall. Oh, what about general tip you can use to contextualize on the DBQ if you don't know the timestamps? The DBQ tends to make it really obvious. Like if we think about last year, the DBQ was talking about women in the 1800s. You could literally just talk about women in Europe and the challenges that they had faced, or like what life was like for women prior to the 1800s. So you can talk about like really limited rights, really limited access in the Enlightenment and scientific revolution. That starts to change. Catherine de Medici, I just love her so much. She's not mentioned by name in the AP test, but she's a great example of politique, which is also probably something that I should have said earlier. Politique is, oh, please write that down. Politiquue, politique is a great example, is when, especially in the wars of religion, someone puts political stability above religious orthodoxy. So Henry II, King Henry IV of France is a great example of politique because he decides it doesn't matter what religion we are, we need to keep politically stable. So I'm going to convert to Catholicism in order to keep France stable after this time period of conflict. Her retaliation against the Protestants, she gets such a bad rap. Oh my gosh. Yeah, St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, is that what we're talking about? I will not. She like came from a Catholic family, and her husband was the leader of France, like was the king of France, and she like wants to keep power, and she wants to keep power for her 10 kids, 4 of which end up being rulers in some parts of Europe. So she at first might be mad at Protestants, but I would argue in the long run, she actually did a lot to promote religious pluralism and peace, religious peace in France. Bismarck would be an interesting example of politique because that idea of like realpolitik is probably what you're thinking of, or real. I don't know how your teacher pronounces it, but realpolitik. It's like that pragmatic approach to politics. So that's kind of a similarity you can think about. Like they are doing what's best for the country, not based on like what they're feeling, but like politically what is best for the country. So that's a way that you can think about that. Okay, it's 7:01. If you have any final questions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you on Wednesday. Also, same time, same place, Wednesday. We're going to go over time period 2, which is going to show up the most on your test because it has the most units on your test. And it's incredibly important to know 1648 to 1815. So that's scientific revolution, Enlightenment, French Revolution, English Civil, oh my gosh, absolutism, constitutionalism, English Civil War, ends with like Napoleon. We have so much to cover in such a short amount of time. Yeah, Bounty, that's great. Columbian Exchange led to mercantilism, led to the desire of colonies, starts to like move Europe toward a money-based economy. I have given you so many predictions. Brody, get out of here. Okay, I'm leaving. 7:02. I'm gonna go eat dinner. You should also study. If you have not yet come up with a study plan, think about what you want to do over the course of the next 2 weeks. One of my students in class today was like, Miss, whenever I'm getting ready in the morning, I have videos on in the background and I can't start my morning without my AP Euro, which is great. You have free time in the morning when you are putting on clothes and getting ready to go to school. Play a Heimler video in the background. Play one of my videos in the background. Do something that gets you engaging with that content when you have the time to do it. Thank you, Erin. I also think that I do a pretty good job. Okay, bye.